Now hear me out. I'm not actually saying that any of these books on this list are bad books. Actually, as a matter of fact, on the contrary, I think most of them are quite good. I just don't think they are quite as good as everyone seems to think they are, or as good as some people will tell you that they are. Actually, as a matter of fact, I was supposed to do this video last week. I'm doing all of my videos from last week this week, because last week I read that Haruki Murakami book and he completely took over my schedule. And then I did the weird book recommendation, all of that stuff. So this was, kind of supposed to be done last week. And actually, as a matter of fact, because I was going to do underrated one week, overrated the next week. And then as a matter of fact, I almost didn't make this video at all, because I have a tendency to talk about things with a certain amount of gusto and energy, which people really like when I'm talking about underrated books that I love. And then sometimes when I'm talking about things I didn't like, I come at it with the same energy, and it can be upsetting because it feels like I'm coming after somebody's favorite book, and I don't mean to do that. I don't know. I'm excitable, I guess. Anyway, like I said, I don't think these are bad books. I just don't think they're quite as awesome as everybody says they are. I think they are genuinely a little bit overrated. I don't mean that in the sense the Goodreads rating says 4.5 and I think it should be a 3.6. I don't know what these are actually rated. I just mean I don't think they're as good as everybody else does. And that's fine. It can be, if it's your favorite book, I'm really sorry because I'm getting ready to talk about how I didn't love it. But coming in hot, we're going to come in real hot with the first one because it's one everybody in the world loves, Dark Matter. Now, I just said in my Weird Books recommendation video that I made last week that I love the Wayward Pines trilogy, and I said in that video that I have a love-hate relationship with Blake Crouch because I either love his books or really don't care for them. And this one is the reason why we have a love-hate relationship, me and Mr. Crouch here, because I did not like this book. All right. Once again, I'm not saying that it's a bad book. This book starts out great. The first act is really good, really strong. Second act kind of dips a bit. You're like, you're losing me, but it's okay. Let's roll with it. We got this. You got this, Blake. I have faith in you. Then he gets to the third act. And the third act in this falls apart. I mean, completely falls apart. Gets to the point where it's almost laughable. You're just dude, what are you doing? I loved me some Wayward Pines, and this was almost hard to get through. Once you got to that third act, you're like, dude, what are you doing? He takes, I have no other way of saying it other than the third act just completely falls apart. It unravels and it ends in this way that I thought was just tragically not good. For a book that started out so strong, and he does that suspense and those chase scenes and that fast-paced momentum that he gets going, that kinetic energy that he has at the beginning of the book. Yeah, pretty much has that kinetic energy all the way through the book. But from a narrative perspective and where he tried to go with it in Act 3, no thank you. I didn't like it. Which is almost feels like sacrilege because that is the book. If you're going to start Blake Crouch, everybody's like, go, just get yourself some Dark Matter and go. So when it was my second attempt at Blake, because I'd already read the Wayward Pines trilogy, I thought it was great. I went for that one next because it's so highly spoken of, and it wasn't good. I didn't enjoy it at all. The ending, it was really that third act. No thank you. Ugh. Next up is His Dark Materials by Philip Pullman. Is that his name? Yes. And this is another one. Really good books. I would say is better than the Blake Crouch Dark Matter one. But these are really good little books. Good story. Good everything. I just don't... People hold this up like it is some just truly groundbreaking thing. I don't know, transformative for them and their lives. They read it and it was just so impactful and so meaningful and so everything. And it wasn't that. I found it to be way too heavy-handed. The messaging in it, I still to this day think it's hilarious that the second book is called The Subtle Knife, because, you kind of have a general, you're not really sure where the messaging's going in book one. And by the time you get to book two, which is The Subtle Knife, the messaging has about the subtlety of being hit in the head with a hammer. So when he's like, he blasts you with the messaging of the book, and then he has the audacity to call the book The Subtle Knife. You're like, dude, there ain't nothing subtle about that. It ain't a knife, it's a hammer, and it ain't subtle. But anyway, and that's not to say that the messaging is bad or it's offensive or upsetting to me in any way. I don't give a crap. Actually, I think the messaging would be just fine. It is nice to have counterpoints to certain, I don't want to get too far into the messaging or what the meanings of this is supposed to be or spoil any of the stories for you. But if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. But it's nice to have a point over here and a counterpoint over here. I'm all about that. It's not that the messaging was not what I would want from a book. It's the way that it's done, the way that it's handled. It is so aggressively, I don't know, over the top, forceful, in your face. Like I said, subtlety of just being hit with a hammer. And it was just not handled well. So it drugged the whole experience down for me. Once again, good books. I don't want to say that they're bad. And for some people, this is just like their jam. Like they put this as some of the greatest stuff they've ever read. For me, it was so heavy-handed and it was too much. It was just too much. It just tainted the whole experience. Next up is Altered Carbon by Richard Morgan. This is another one that a lot of sci-fi booktubers really will parade around as something truly fabulous. And actually the adaptation, the Netflix adaptation, was truly fabulous. I should have put that on my adaptation was better list, to be quite honest. I think the adaptation was better than this book. And if we're talking about Altered Carbon, the first book is the best book. This is a trilogy, which I haven't finished because I read this and I thought, well, that was a little lackluster. I read the second one. I was so bored with the second book. I have the third book right here on my bookshelf. I haven't read it yet. I don't know if I'll ever finish that series, because I was so bored out of my mind with the second book. It's not I don't know, they're not as exciting as I wanted them to be. It's like this cyberpunk noir, detective story, murder mystery. At least the first one is. You're like, this sounds great. And then you get in there and it's a lot more dull than, it's not a page turner. And I've heard it described as that. It wasn't that for me. I don't know. This one was a letdown because I liked the show so much and I was so excited to read it. This one was, once again, not bad, just not what I wanted it to be. Next up, I threw a manga in here for all of my manga lovers out there. And for my book lovers, I'm sorry, because some people get upset when I put manga on a book list. But it is Monster. And this is a manga that is hailed by pretty much everyone I've ever heard talk about it as a masterpiece. Perfect. These are the two words that I hear thrown about way more often than any others with this manga. Masterpiece and perfect. And I think when I read it and reviewed it here on the channel, I think I gave it an 8 out of 10, which is good. That is a very good score. Average is 5. So if you have just an average book, 5. 6 and 7s are good. 8 is really good. And then 9s and 10s are pretty much, we're getting near perfect. So 8 out of 10, very, very good. But that is a far cry from a 10 out of 10. That is definitely not what I would consider a masterpiece. Definitely not perfect. As a matter of fact, it was what did it for me was the convenience, and the situations started to feel so contrived as you went through it that it took your suspension of disbelief and really stretched it to almost a breaking point at several points in the story. The story was so convenient, and then he tries to go through all these different countries and make the story feel so big, but literally every town he goes to, he finds somebody from the exact same organization, from the exact same experiment. So everybody was tied back to the exact same initiating event or whatever you want to call that. And instead of making the world feel bigger, all it did was made the world feel smaller. Anyway, I don't want to complain about it too much because it really was good. It really was his pacing, his dramatic tension, his ability to unfold events as the story goes on. Really, really good stuff. The overall experience, I would say, was probably about an 8 out of 10. But I see people say perfect and masterpiece, and I just go, but it wasn't, though. There were a lot of flaws along the way, and I don't think people like to acknowledge that those flaws existed. Anyway, next up is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. And now this, I will put this on just about any book recommendation list ever, because this is a really good book. So why is it overrated, do you say? Because I always see it like, it will legitimately be people like YouTubers will do like top 10 science fiction books of all time, and it'll be like number 1. I've seen a lot of lists where this takes like number 1 or number 2. Like Ender's Game is up there for people. And I don't, like, for example, I did a top 10 science fiction list. It didn't even crack the top 10. That's not to say that it's too far off. It's pretty close, but it didn't even make the top 10. So for me to see the way it's discussed, at least in the booktube space, and to see it being hailed as the best of the best, I just go, I don't know. I feel like that is really giving it too much credit. I would say that, like I said, this is one of the ones where I kind of feel almost bad putting it on this list because it is so good. And like I said, if I ever get to like a science fiction like book recommendation list, there's a real good chance that I'll be putting this on there, just because I like to, when I do my recommendation lists, I like to do it of books that aren't on my top 10 list, because obviously I recommend those books, but I try to give some shout outs to like books that aren't the top 10s. So, and this is highly good, highly recommendable, but I would definitely not call it the greatest science fiction. I would definitely not call it the greatest science fiction book ever written, and I feel like it gets a little bit too much credit. Next up, I feel like I'm making enemies, and I'm so sorry. I don't mean to do that. Everybody, please be nice to me in the comments, because I feel like just no one's gonna like me after this video. The Blade itself. I struggled with this one. You could go watch this video. I have a review of this up, and I struggled for like the first 2/3 of it. I kind of started to connect with it and enjoy it in the last third. By the time I read the next 2 books in the series, I really started to enjoy my time, and I really ended that series on a positive note. I enjoyed the overall trilogy. I did not really, I don't know, this wasn't a super great experience. I said in that video that this was not a good first book. It didn't really function well as a book in and of itself. That makes some people upset when you say that. Like, like the idea that a first book in a trilogy should succeed both as setting up the trilogy and then also work as a standalone book. People don't like, people push back on that for some reason. I genuinely believe it should do both. If it's your first book in a series, it should have 2 jobs: set up the series and be enjoyable as a product in and of itself. Like, that seems, I don't know. Anyway, and it failed. It set up the series very well, but it failed at being a good book by itself, on its own, and on its own merits. And so because of that, I feel like, and then people just rave about the Blade itself. It actually takes a lot of lists, again, for just how great it is. And I say, nah, definitely the weakest of the trilogy. Like, not even a question to that, right? There's not a question to that. You have to let me know in the comments if I'm like really talking crazy right now. But this is by far the weakest book in that trilogy. Please tell me I'm not nuts. Anyway, although I did enjoy that trilogy, I really felt positively when it was over. This is why I didn't want to make this video, because I feel like I'm just shoving my foot right in my mouth. Now, Hyperion Cantos. Now, this one very much specifically, I want to say the Cantos, not Hyperion, because I said in that video, my top 10 science fiction books of all time, this book really should be in that conversation. If you're having a conversation about the greatest science fiction book ever written, this should be a part of the conversation. But when I hold this book up, I'm really saying the Cantos. Cantos is extremely overrated, especially the Endymion books. Hyperion, fabulous book, just truly wonderful, amazing, like 8 or a 9, I forget. I don't even know what I rated it back then, but a genuinely amazing book. Fall of Hyperion, step down. I didn't enjoy it near as much as this one. It was a fine ending. The ending was good enough. I didn't like the new framing device that they kind of added into it and how it was done. It just was a big step down from Hyperion, but it ended well enough. If he would have stopped at the duology, we wouldn't be here right now. But he didn't stop at the duology. He moved on to the Endymion books. And I will genuinely say, I keep saying these books are good. They're just overrated. These books are good. They're just overrated. I will say the Endymion books are bad. Legitimately not good books. I legitimately did not enjoy my experience there. I do not recommend them. If you've made, it's almost unheard of for me. If you've made it through the Hyperion books, I don't recommend going any further. It's not worth your time. Anyway, bad. Those are the ones on this whole list, which I will say I did not like those books. If you did, that's fine. Don't let me rain on your parade, please. But, for the most part, I say these are good, but those ones, no. Anyway, next up, and last but not least, I have to say, Murder Bot. This is another one that is just a real YouTube darling. Everybody that I can think of raves about Murderbot and just how good these little books are, and oh my gosh, they're just so wonderful. And it's this robot, and the robot has social anxiety, and then there's so much levity and humor and all of this stuff baked into the books. Oh my goodness, they're just so funny. Only they're not. They're not really funny. They're trying to be funny a lot, and it just falls flat. It's not good. The social anxiety part for the robot, kind of interesting, but not, I don't know. They're just super. Now, this is definitely not bad. I don't know. I'm already coming off overly harsh, I feel like. This one's not bad either, but it's kind of super average, like real middle of the road. It's not overwhelmingly positive in any metric for me. Whereas people just rave, like I said, rave so much about the books and how great they are and all of that. I've read 2 of these. I've read All Systems Red, and what's the next one? Artificial Condition. And they're fine. They're fine. And that's about as good of a compliment as I can give them. So when you hear somebody just raving about how great they are, I'm like, you had a very different experience with this robot than I did. Anyway, that's the last one that I would say is probably just not quite as, like I said, not bad. So, if you, and on top of that, let me pull that back up here. Look at the size of this thing. So if you're looking into trying out Martha Wells and All Systems Red or the Murderbot, dude, you could knock that out in an afternoon. These things are so small. So don't be like scared away. Go try it for yourself. See what you think. Get in the comments. Tell me that I'm completely wrong. I don't know. But that's just how I felt. And I thought it wasn't quite as good as everybody seems to think that it is. Anyway, as always, everybody, the link for my Patreon is in the description below. The link for my Discord's in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.